They told us the Ichor would kill us. They told us it had killed everything else. Every single civilization, every empire, every species that had ever reached into the dark between the stars and pulled something back. The Vel'Korath, gone. 17 billion sentient beings dissolved into organic slurry in less than a solar cycle. The Dranathi Collective, erased so thoroughly that their homeworld now registers as a geological anomaly rather than a graveyard. The Yik Supremacy, the Orenthian Spires, the billion-year-old lithic mines of the Corward Nebula, all consumed, all silenced, all reduced to chemical residue floating in the void. And then a human, a starving, desperate, half-dead scavenger named Corporal Elena Vasquez, did something that no sentient creature in the recorded history of the Milky Way had ever done. She swallowed it. She put the forbidden death of the galaxy into her mouth, and she swallowed. And she didn't die. What happened next didn't just change humanity's future. It broke every biological law the galaxy had ever known. It terrified civilizations that had ruled the stars for millions of years, and it turned the most dangerous substance in the known universe into the foundation of an empire that would never, ever fall. This is the story of how humanity drank the poison of gods and became something the galaxy had never seen before. If you're new to HFY Endurance Tale, hit that subscribe button right now, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling me, if you were in Elena's position, would you have swallowed the Ichor? Like this video, and share it with someone who loves epic sci-fi, because this story is going to take you somewhere you've never been before. The year was 2347. Humanity had been crawling through the stars for just over a century. Not soaring, crawling. Our ships were slow, our technology was primitive by galactic standards. Our colonies were fragile outposts clinging to the edges of systems that no other species wanted. We were scavengers, bottom feeders, the galaxy's newest and least impressive residents. The galactic hegemony, that vast, ancient coalition of elder species, had acknowledged our existence the way a city acknowledges a rat in its walls. We were noted, filed, ignored. But humanity has always had a particular talent that the elder species never understood. We go where we're told not to go. The forbidden void zones were exactly what they sounded like. Sectors of space that the hegemony had sealed off with gravitational barriers, warning beacons, and automated kill satellites. Hundreds of them scattered across the galaxy like quarantine markers around plague pits. Every spacefaring species knew the rule. You do not enter the void zones. You do not scan them. You do not even orient your telescopes in their direction. The reason was simple. The Ichor was in there. The substance had many names across many civilizations. The Vel'Korath called it the breath of the Unmaker. The Dranathi named it the silence between stars. The hegemony's official designation was clinical and cold. Compound Omega Null, a sentient or semi-sentient biological fluid of unknown origin, found pooling in the deepest gravitational wells of dead systems. It was black. Not the black of ink or oil or shadow, but a black that seemed to devour light itself, a liquid darkness that absorbed photons and returned nothing. Instruments pointed at it registered readings that shouldn't have been possible. Anti-biological resonance frequencies. Molecular structures that appeared to exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. And it was alive. Or at least, it behaved as if it was alive. The Ichor moved on its own. It pulsed. It responded to proximity. When organic material was brought near it, any organic material, from bacteria to sentient tissue, it reached for it. Tendrils of impossible blackness would extend from the main mass, stretching with a slow, deliberate hunger that every species that had ever observed it described the same way. Predatory. The hegemony's records on the Ichor stretched back over 3 billion years. In that time, every single species that had made physical contact with it had been destroyed. Not injured, not sickened. Destroyed. The Ichor broke down biological matter at the cellular level, rewriting DNA, corrupting protein folding, dissolving neural pathways, not randomly but with what appeared to be surgical precision. It targeted the most complex biological systems first: nervous systems, immune systems, reproductive systems. It didn't just kill organisms, it unmade them. It reduced sophisticated biological machinery to its most primitive components and then consumed those components for energy. The chemical analysis was nightmarish. The Ichor contained dark matter proteins, a category of molecule that shouldn't have existed in liquid form. These proteins operated on principles that violated standard biochemistry. They could phase through cellular membranes without disrupting them. They could replicate using the host organism's own ATP cycle. They generated microfields of cosmic radiation as a metabolic byproduct. Radiation that further damaged surrounding tissue and created a cascading failure loop. In short, the Ichor was the most efficient biological weapon the universe had ever produced, and no one knew where it came from. There were theories, of course. Some xenobiologists believed it was a remnant of a pre-galactic civilization, a weapon left behind by beings so ancient they predated the formation of most star systems. Others thought it was a natural phenomenon, a kind of biological dark energy that accumulated in gravitational dead zones the way water collects in valleys. A few radical theorists suggested it was the galaxy's immune system, a defense mechanism designed to cull species that grew too numerous or too powerful. Whatever it was, the rule was absolute. Do not touch it. Do not even think about it. Enter humanity. Specifically, enter the crew of the UES Vagrant Hope, a decommissioned mining vessel repurposed as a deep space salvage ship, crewed by 23 humans who had no business being anywhere near a forbidden void zone. They were desperate. The colony on Kepler 442b was dying. A crop blight had destroyed 3 consecutive harvests. Supply ships from Earth were 18 months out. The nearest hegemony trade station had refused to sell food to humans at anything less than 600% markup, a price the colony couldn't pay. So, Captain Jorge Vasquez, Aleda's father, made a decision that was either suicidal or brilliant. He took his ship into Void Zone Theta 7, a sealed sector surrounding a dead binary system, because his long-range scanners had detected metallic signatures that might be salvageable wreckage from an ancient Velkoroth fleet. If they could strip the wreckage for rare metals, they could trade those metals for food. Simple, desperate, human. What they found was not wreckage. The Vagrant Hope dropped out of its faster-than-light transit into a graveyard, but not a ship graveyard, a civilization graveyard. Entire planets had been reduced to rubble. The binary stars at the center of the system had been dimmed, not by natural stellar decay, but by something that had consumed a measurable percentage of their energy output. And floating in the Lagrange point between the 2 dying stars, held in perfect gravitational equilibrium, was a sphere of Ichor, the size of a small moon. It pulsed. The readings were impossible. The mass alone was enough to generate its own tidal forces. The radiation output was enough to sterilize a planet. And the biological signature, the faint, rhythmic pulse that their instruments could barely categorize, suggested that this was not a pool or a deposit. It was a reservoir, a source, maybe even the source. Captain Vasquez ordered an immediate retreat, but it was too late. The sphere had noticed them. A tendril of Ichor, a thread of living darkness thinner than a human hair, but hundreds of kilometers long, detached from the main mass and crossed the distance between the sphere and the Vagrant Hope in seconds. It phased through the hull without leaving a mark. It phased through the bulkheads, the wiring, the air recycling systems. 17 people died in the first 4 minutes. The Ichor entered through their skin, their eyes, their lungs. They didn't scream for long. Their nervous systems were the first thing to go, dissolved, rewritten, consumed. Their bodies collapsed into themselves, organs liquefying in a precise sequence that the ship's medical AI recorded with clinical detachment before the same tendril found and destroyed the AI's biological computing substrate. 6 survivors made it to the sealed emergency shelter in the ship's core. Captain Vasquez, his daughter Elena, 4 others. They sealed the door. They activated the radiation shielding. They held their breath and listened to the sound of their crewmates dying on the other side of the bulkhead. And then, they waited. For 3 days, they waited. The Ichor was patient. It had consumed the dead. Now it seeped through the ship like fog, pooling in corners, coating surfaces. waiting. The emergency shelter's shielding held, but barely. Hairline fractures in the radiation barrier allowed microscopic amounts of the substance to enter the air as vapor. They were breathing it. In tiny, infinitesimal amounts, but they were breathing it. On the second day, 2 of the 4 other survivors began showing symptoms. Discoloration of the veins, tremors, cognitive decline. By the end of the 3rd day, they were dead. On the 3rd day, Captain Vasquez's nose began to bleed black. He knew what it meant. He'd seen it 17 times already. He looked at his daughter, 26 years old, a combat medic with field experience and a stubbornness that she'd inherited from every generation of Vasquez that had ever lived. She was showing no symptoms. None. Her blood work, checked obsessively on the shelter's basic medical scanner, showed elevated white blood cell counts, but no cellular degradation. Something about her was different. But she was starving. They all were. 3 days without food, minimal water, breathing poison. Jorge Vasquez made his last decision as captain and as a father. He took the emergency sample container, a small vial that the shelter's automated systems had collected from the air, containing approximately 50 milliliters of condensed Ichor vapor, and he handed it to his daughter. "Drink it," he said. Elena stared at him. She stared at the vial. The liquid inside was so dark, it seemed to pull her vision into it, like staring into a pupil that stared back. "Dad, you're not dying from it in the air. Your body is doing something with it. I don't know what, but you're not dying." He coughed, and black spattered across his palm. "I am. Reeves is. Cho is. You're not. That doesn't mean." "We're dead anyway, Elena. All of us. The ship is gone. No one's coming. If that thing can't kill you from the air, maybe your body can handle more. Maybe it'll give you something. Energy. Time. I don't know." He closed her fingers around the vial. "But I know that if you don't try, you die here with us, and someone needs to survive to warn the colony." Corporal Elena Vasquez looked at the vial. She looked at her father, who was already more dead than alive, black veins crawling up his neck, like the roots of some terrible tree. She looked at the door, beyond which an ancient and patient darkness waited, and she made a choice that would reshape the galaxy. She opened the vial. She drank. Now, what do you think happened to Elena's body in the moments after she swallowed the most lethal substance in galactic history? Did it kill her slowly, like it killed everything else? Or did something inside her, something buried deep in the strange, stubborn, irrational biology of the human species, fight back? Hold that thought, because what comes next broke every model of biology the galaxy had ever built. The first 3 seconds were agony. Elena described it later. In the classified debriefings, in the medical journals, in the testimony before the United Earth Parliament that would eventually be broadcast to every human colony in the galaxy as swallowing a star that hated you. The Ichor hit her stomach lining and immediately began doing what it had always done. It attacked. Dark matter proteins phased through her cellular membranes. Microradiation bloomed in her gut. Her body's cells began receiving the same death signal that had erased 17 of her crewmates, 4 survivors, and, across 3 billion years of galactic history, an estimated 900 trillion sentient beings. Her stomach lining should have dissolved. Her intestinal wall should have ruptured. Her bloodstream should have become a highway for the Ichor's systematic dismantling of every organ in her body. But Elena Vasquez was human. And human biology, it turned out, was broken in exactly the right way. Here is what the hegemony's greatest xenobiologists, beings who had studied life across millions of worlds for eons, never understood about humanity. We are dirty. Not in the metaphorical sense. In the literal, biological, microbial sense. The human body is not a single organism. It is a walking ecosystem, a chaotic, teeming, constantly warring collection of roughly 38 trillion human cells, and approximately the same number of microbial cells, bacteria, fungi, archaea, viruses, billions of them, many of which are not even fully understood by human science. The human gut alone contains over 1,000 different species of microorganism, many of which exist nowhere else in the known universe. This is not normal. Most species in the galaxy evolved in relatively stable biospheres, Their biology is clean, efficient, streamlined. Their immune systems are designed to maintain purity, to identify foreign material and eliminate it with precision. The Velkorath immune system, for example, operated like a surgical laser. Identify the threat, target it, destroy it, done. The human immune system operates like a bar fight. It is chaotic. It is redundant. It overreacts, underreacts, sometimes attacks the body's own tissues for no discernible reason, and maintains a standing army of white blood cells so aggressive and so diverse that human immunologists had spent centuries just trying to catalog all the different ways our bodies can wage biological war. And our gut microbiome, that churning, ancient, impossibly complex ecosystem of microbial life that we carry inside us, was the product of millions of years of evolution on one of the most biologically hostile planets in the galaxy, Earth, a world where every organism, from the smallest bacterium to the largest predator, existed in a state of permanent, escalating biological arms race. The dark matter proteins of the Ichor were unlike anything that had ever existed in a terrestrial environment. They operated on principles that Earth biology had never encountered. They should have been completely foreign, completely incomprehensible to the human immune system. But here's the thing about the human gut microbiome. It doesn't need to understand something to eat it. In the first 30 seconds after Elena swallowed the Ichor, her gut bacteria encountered the dark matter proteins and did what gut bacteria have been doing for 4 billion years on Earth. They tried to metabolize them. Not intelligently, not strategically, just blindly, stubbornly, with the mindless persistence of organisms that have survived every mass extinction event Earth has ever thrown at them. Acidophilus cultures broke down the protein sheaths. Bacteroids fragmented the radiation-generating cores. Firmicutes absorbed the energy byproducts, and in a twist that would later cause 3 hegemony biochemists to resign their positions in existential despair, incorporated those byproducts into their own metabolic cycles. They were eating the death, and they were thriving on it. Within 5 minutes, Elena's gut microbiome had undergone a radical shift. Bacterial populations that could process the dark matter proteins exploded in number. Populations that couldn't were pushed to the margins. Her digestive system became, in real time, a processing plant for the most toxic substance in the galaxy, breaking it down, neutralizing its lethal properties, and converting its energy output into forms that human cells could actually use. The pain faded. It didn't stop. It faded. The star that hated her dimmed to a burning warmth that spread from her core outward. And then the second phase began. The Ichor was semi-sentient. It had strategies. When its initial attack on Elena's digestive system was countered, it adapted. It shifted tactics, sending its proteins deeper into her body through her bloodstream, targeting her nervous system the way it had targeted every other species' nervous system for billions of years. It reached her spinal column, and her immune system was waiting. Not because it had anticipated the attack. This human immune system doesn't anticipate, it reacts, with overwhelming, disproportionate, sometimes self-destructive force. T cells, B cells, natural killer cells, macrophages, every weapon in the human biological arsenal mobilized simultaneously in a response so massive that Elena later said she felt like her blood was boiling. Her fever spiked to 41.2 degrees Celsius. Her body was cooking itself, deliberately raising its own temperature to create an environment hostile to the invading proteins. Her bone marrow went into overdrive, producing white blood cells at a rate that should have been physiologically impossible. And in the middle of this biological apocalypse, something unprecedented happened. The Ichor's dark matter proteins, battered by acids, consumed by bacteria, attacked by immune cells, and cooked by fever, began to integrate. Not as invaders, as components. Elena's nervous system, in its desperate fight for survival, began incorporating the Ichor's quantum state molecular structures into its own neural pathways. The proteins that had been designed to dissolve nervous systems instead became part of one. They bonded with her myelin sheaths, enhancing signal transmission. They wrapped around her synapses, creating new connections that operated on principles somewhere between biochemistry and quantum mechanics. The dark matter protein saturated her optical nerves, and then her irises, turning them from brown to a deep, lightless black. Not the black of pigment, but the black of the Ichor itself. She could suddenly perceive radiation frequencies that no human eye had ever detected. She could see cosmic rays. She could see the microwave background radiation of the universe itself, a faint, omnipresent glow that painted the walls of the emergency shelter in colors that didn't have names. Then her skin. The Ichor spread through her dermal layers, not destroying them, but reinforcing them, creating a subepidermal lattice of dark matter protein that functioned as a natural radiation shield. Cosmic rays that would have given a normal human lethal radiation poisoning in minutes now struck her skin and were absorbed, their energy shunted into her metabolic system as fuel. A living, breathing, walking filter for the most dangerous forms of energy in the universe. Her father watched the transformation with dying eyes. The black veins had reached his face. His breathing was shallow, ragged, wet. "Elena," he whispered. "Your eyes." She looked at him, and she saw, really saw for the first time, the Ichor killing him. She could see it now, with her new vision. The dark matter proteins in his bloodstream, glowing with a cold, predatory light, moving with purpose. Unmake, consume, move on. She reached for him, and the Ichor inside her responded. It flowed from her fingertips, not as an attack, not as a weapon, but as an extension of her own biology. It met the Ichor inside Jorge Vasquez, and this was the part that later made the hegemony's top scientists question everything they believed about the universe. It dominated it. Elena's Ichor was different now. It had been processed through the human biological gauntlet. It had been broken down and rebuilt by bacteria, hammered by immune cells, integrated into a nervous system that operated on stubbornness and fury. It was still Ichor, but it was human Ichor. And when it encountered the raw, unprocessed Ichor in her father's bloodstream, it overrode it, neutralized it, consumed it. The black veins on Jorge Vasquez's face began to fade. He gasped. Color returned to his skin. His vital signs, flickering on the medical scanner, stabilized. Elena pulled her hand back and stared at it. Her veins were visible beneath her skin, dark lines carrying a substance that was no longer entirely blood, and no longer entirely Ichor, but something new, something that had never existed before. She flexed her fingers. She felt strong. The starvation was gone. Her body was feeding on the ambient radiation in the room, converting cosmic background energy into calories with an efficiency that would have made a photosynthetic organism weep with envy. The fatigue was gone. The fear was still there, but underneath it, something else was growing. A certainty. Deep, absolute, and terrifying. She could feel the Ichor sphere outside the ship, that moon-sized reservoir of primordial death pulsing in the void between two dying stars. She could feel it the way you feel the warmth of a fire from across a room. It was still reaching for the ship. But now, for the first time in 3 billion years, it was also afraid. The human body had just done the impossible. It had consumed the galaxy's oldest and most lethal substance, and turned it into a symbiotic enhancement. But the transformation of one woman in a damaged ship was only the beginning. Because when the galaxy found out what Elena Vasquez had become, the reaction wasn't wonder. It was terror. And what the hegemony did next, what they tried to do to humanity before we could spread, is a story of betrayal so vast, it almost ended our species before we'd even begun to understand what we were becoming. Elena Vasquez saved the remaining survivors. Using the Ichor that now flowed through her like a second bloodstream, she neutralized the substance that had saturated the vagrant hope. She moved through the ship like an antibody through an infected body, and everywhere she went, the raw Ichor retreated. It dissolved into inert residue. It died, if something semi-sentient could be said to die. She repaired the ship's critical systems by hand, working for 72 hours straight, without food, water, or sleep. Her body didn't need them anymore. She was feeding on the radiation that poured from the dying binary stars, energy that would have killed any unmodified human in seconds. She flew the vagrant Hope out of Void Zone Theta 7, with a crew of 3 survivors, herself, her father, and Specialist Reeves, who had been on the edge of death before Elena's touch had pulled him back. She docked at Kepler 442b, and she told no one what had happened. Not immediately. Not until she understood it better. She filed a salvage report that mentioned equipment failure and crew losses due to anomalous radiation exposure. She submitted to a medical examination that she carefully managed, ensuring that the colony's limited medical equipment registered her vitals as within acceptable parameters, which they were, if you didn't look too closely at what those parameters had shifted to. For 6 months, Elena Vasquez lived as a normal human, while her body continued to evolve. The Ichor integration deepened. Her nervous system became more refined, her perception sharper, her physical capabilities quietly exceeding any recorded human baseline. She didn't age. She didn't get sick. Not with the colony's crop blight, not with the respiratory infections that swept through the settlement, not with anything. Her father recovered fully. Specialist Reeves recovered fully. Both showed elevated immune function, but nothing like Elena's transformation. They had been saved by her processed Ichor, given a transfusion of immunity without the full integration. They were enhanced but not transformed. Elena was something else entirely, and the hegemony was watching. Here is what humanity didn't know at the time. The forbidden void zones were not just quarantine markers, they were monitoring stations. Every void zone was surrounded by a network of deep space sensors that tracked any biological activity within a light year of the Ichor deposits. These sensors reported directly to the hegemony's Central Biological Threat Assessment Bureau, a body so secretive that most hegemony member species didn't know it existed. The Bureau had detected the Vagrant Hope's entry into Theta 7. They had monitored the crew's life signs. They had watched 17 humans die, and that was expected, routine. The Ichor killed everything. Another species making the mistake of touching what should not be touched. The Bureau filed it under incidental biological termination and prepared to update Earth's threat assessment from negligible to negligible, confirmed susceptible to omega null. And then they detected something that froze every analyst in the Bureau simultaneously. A survivor. Not just a survivor, a human whose biological signature was changing, integrating, adapting, doing something that 3 billion years of galactic biological data said was categorically, fundamentally, absolutely impossible. The Bureau's predictive models, algorithms refined over eons, fed with data from millions of species across billions of years, ran the scenario. Result, error. They ran it again. Result, error. They ran it 14,000 times, adjusting parameters, expanding variables, accounting for every conceivable biological mechanism in their database. Result, error, error, error. The models could not compute a scenario in which a biological organism survived contact with omega null. It was not a matter of probability. It was not a matter of genetic luck or environmental conditions. The models treated survival as a logical impossibility, equivalent to dividing by zero. The universe did not allow it. The fundamental rules of organic chemistry as understood by the most advanced scientific minds in galactic history did not allow it. And yet the sensors were showing a human, a single, insignificant, theoretically primitive human, walking around on a colony world with omega null integrated into her cellular structure. The Bureau classified Earth as a code omega anomaly, the first such designation in 1100 years. And then they made their first mistake. They decided to observe rather than act. For 18 months, the Bureau watched Elena Vasquez through long-range biosensors. They watched her body continue to evolve. They watched her immune system develop capabilities that their models couldn't explain. They watched her ambient radiation absorption increase until she was drawing energy from sources that their instruments could barely detect. They filed reports. They debated. And while they debated, something happened that shattered their observation protocols entirely. The Kepler 442b colony was attacked. Not by the hegemony. By a Vorthon raiding fleet. Pirates from a mid-tier species that preyed on vulnerable settlements in the galactic fringe. 3 cruisers, approximately 200 armed raiders, targeting the colony for its rare mineral deposits. Standard procedure for a Vorthon raid: orbital bombardment to soften defenses, ground assault to secure resources, departure within 6 hours. The colony had no military vessels, no orbital defenses, and a security force of 40 lightly armed volunteers. The Vorthon expected no significant resistance. What they got was Elena Vasquez. She walked out of the colony's main airlock and into the irradiated hellscape of the orbital bombardment zone without a suit. Without anything except the black-veined body that the Ichor had rebuilt into something the galaxy had never seen. The Vorthon ground forces opened fire. Plasma bolts struck her skin and dissipated. The dark matter lattice in her dermal layer absorbed the energy, converted it, fed it back into her metabolic system. She didn't flinch. She didn't slow down. She walked through a concentrated crossfire that would have vaporized a light assault vehicle, and she reached the first Vorthon soldier, and she touched him. The Ichor flowed. Not the raw, predatory Ichor of the void zones. Her Ichor. Human Ichor. Processed, refined, and directed by a human nervous system that was now operating on quantum-enhanced neural pathways. The Vorthon soldier's biology was sophisticated. His species had evolved robust immune systems and redundant organ structures specifically to survive the hazards of deep space raiding. It didn't matter. Elena's Ichor rewrote his cellular structure in 11 seconds. Not fatally, she chose not to kill him. She simply shut down his voluntary motor functions, leaving him conscious but paralyzed, his body locked in a state of biochemical stasis that his own biology couldn't override. She did the same to the next soldier, and the next, and the next. In 40 minutes, she had neutralized the entire ground force. 200 armed raiders, frozen in place, staring with wide and terrified eyes at a human woman with black eyes and dark veins who moved through their ranks like death itself. Except death would have been kinder, because death would have ended their awareness. Elena left them aware. She left them watching. She left them able to feel every moment of their helplessness. The Vorthon cruisers retreated. The Bureau's sensors recorded the entire engagement. The analysts watched the playback in silence. And then the Bureau convened an emergency session and reclassified Earth from Code Omega Anomaly to existential threat to galactic biological order. The debate was over. Now it was time for the hegemony to act. They assembled a diplomatic fleet, 12 vessels carrying ambassadors from the 6 founding species of the hegemony, escorted by a military contingent sufficient to sterilize a planet. They traveled to Kepler 442b under the pretense of first formal diplomatic contact with the human species. What they actually came to do was assess, contain, and if necessary, eliminate the threat. The fleet arrived to find something they did not expect. Elena wasn't the only one anymore. In the months since the Vorthon attack, she had, carefully, methodically, with full informed consent, begun sharing her processed Ichor with volunteers from the colony. Not the full integration, not the complete transformation, but enough to convey resistance, enough to enhance their immune systems, strengthen their bodies, sharpen their perceptions. 47 colonists now carried human-processed Ichor in their bloodstreams. 47 humans who didn't get sick, didn't tire, didn't burn under radiation that should have killed them. The hegemony ambassadors met with Elena in the colony's central hall. The lead ambassador was a Velkorath remnant, one of the few survivors of the species that had been nearly exterminated by the Ichor 3 billion years ago. Her name was translated into English as Keeper of Sorrows, and she had lived for over 4,000 years, carrying the memory of her species' near extinction, like a wound that never healed. She looked at Elena Vasquez, at her black eyes, her dark veins, the faint shimmer of radiation absorption playing across her skin, and she said 5 words that would later become one of the most famous sentences in galactic diplomatic history. You should not be possible. Elena met her gaze. And yet here I am. The substance that flows through you has destroyed every civilization it has ever touched. It unmade my people. 17 billion lives. We were the greatest biological engineers the galaxy had ever known, and we could not survive contact with the Omega Null. We could not even slow its advance. And you primitive, chaotic, impossible creatures, you drank it. We did. Why are you not dead? Elena was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that the Keeper of Sorrows would later describe as the most terrifying sentence she had ever heard in 4,000 years of existence. Because we're built wrong. And this time, wrong was exactly right. The diplomatic session lasted 6 hours. The hegemony ambassadors performed every scan, every test, every analysis their technology allowed. They confirmed what the Bureau had already determined. The Ichor was genuinely integrated into Elena's biology. It was stable, and it was transferable. The implications were catastrophic from the hegemony's perspective. For 3 billion years, the Ichor had been the galaxy's ultimate equalizer. No species could resist it. No empire could weaponize it. It was the great filter, the thing that kept any single civilization from becoming too powerful, too dominant, too permanent. Species rose, touched the Ichor, and fell. The cycle continued. The balance was maintained. Humanity had broken the cycle. Humanity could survive the Ichor, could process it, could use it, could share immunity with others. And that meant that the fundamental balance of power in the galaxy, the balance that the hegemony had been built on, the balance that had kept the elder species in control for eons, was now obsolete. The hegemony's military escort began charging weapons. The lead admiral, a Dranathi tactician with 300 years of combat experience, sent a coded transmission to the flagship. Recommend immediate sterilization of colony. Threat assessment, terminal. Delay increases risk exponentially. The Keeper of Sorrows intercepted the transmission. She countermanded it. Not out of mercy, not out of compassion, out of cold, ancient, 4,000-year-old pragmatism. If we destroy this colony, she said, and even one human with the integration survives, even one, they will know we tried to kill them, and they will have the Ichor, and they will have a reason to use it against us. We do not survive that scenario. The Admiral argued. The ambassadors debated. The military contingent maintained weapons lock on the colony. And Elena Vasquez, who could see the energy signatures of charged weapons through the walls of the colony's central hall, because her eyes now operated across 17 additional spectral frequencies, stood quietly and waited. She didn't threaten, she didn't posture, she didn't need to. The hegemony looked at her and saw the end of their era. They withdrew, but they didn't give up. They simply changed strategies. If they couldn't destroy humanity, they would isolate humanity, quarantine them, cut them off from galactic trade, galactic communication, galactic civilization. Let them wither on their colonies, contained and controlled, while the hegemony developed countermeasures. They reclassified Earth's entire stellar neighborhood as a biological hazard zone. They erected new barriers, gravitational, electromagnetic, political. They declared humanity a plague species and prohibited any hegemony member from making contact. They expected this to work. They expected humanity to stay in its box. But when has humanity ever stayed in its box? When has any wall, any barrier, any rule ever stopped us from reaching for what's on the other side? The hegemony thought they were containing a threat. But what they were actually doing, what their isolation and hostility and fear were actually creating, was something far worse than a species with Ichor immunity. They were creating a species with a reason to fight. And when humans fight, we don't just resist. We adapt. We evolve. We take the weapons aimed at us and turn them into tools of conquest. What happened next wasn't defense. It was the birth of an arsenal. The quarantine lasted 11 years. In those 11 years, the hegemony assumed humanity was dying slowly behind its barriers, cut off from galactic resources, isolated from trade networks, denied access to the advanced technology that other species took for granted. Surely, the primitive ape descendants would stagnate, turn on each other, as primitive species so often did. The hegemony assumed wrong. 11 years was enough. Elena Vasquez spent the first 3 years perfecting the integration process, working with the colony's doctors, and with her own evolving understanding of the Ichor's biochemistry, an understanding that grew as her quantum-enhanced neural pathways developed new cognitive capabilities. She developed a protocol for safe, controlled, repeatable integration. Not everyone could achieve full integration. Elena's level of symbiosis required a specific combination of genetic factors, gut microbiome composition, and what the doctors eventually just called biological stubbornness, a quality that seemed to correlate strongly with individuals who had survived extreme physical trauma, chronic illness, or prolonged environmental stress. In other words, the people who integrated best with the Ichor were the people whose bodies had already learned to fight the impossible. But partial integration, the enhanced immunity, the radiation resistance, the improved physical capabilities, could be achieved by almost any human. The processed Ichor, filtered through Elena's biology and further refined through a series of bacterial culture processes that the colony's microbiologists developed, could be administered as a simple injection. One dose, 72 hours of fever, pain, and biological restructuring. And then, a human who didn't get sick. A human who could breathe toxic atmospheres. A human who could shrug off radiation levels that would have killed any other species in the galaxy. By the end of year 3, every human in the Kepler 442b colony was integrated. By the end of year 5, the protocol had been transmitted to every human colony in the stellar neighborhood. Smuggled past the hegemony's communication barriers by ships that were too small and too primitive for the hegemony's sensors to reliably track. Because the hegemony had never bothered to develop sensors calibrated for human technology. Why would they? Humans were negligible. By the end of year 7, an estimated 60% of all humans in the galaxy were partially integrated. And by year 8, humanity began to go on the offensive, not with weapons, not at first, with biology. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a xenobiologist working on the colony of Proxima Centauri b, made the breakthrough that changed everything. He discovered that the processed Ichor in integrated humans could be further refined, concentrated, and aerosolized without losing its biological activity. More importantly, he discovered that the aerosolized form retained its selective properties. It was lethal to non-human biology. It was harmless, even beneficial, to integrated humans. The implications hit the military strategists like a thunderbolt. Humanity had just developed the ultimate biological weapon, a substance that could be deployed as a gas, a liquid, a contact agent, or even a foodborne contaminant, and that would incapacitate or kill any non-human organism while leaving humans completely untouched. The ethical debates were fierce. The military applications were undeniable. Admiral Sarah Chen, the highest-ranking officer in humanity's fledgling naval command, convened a closed session with her senior staff and laid out the strategic situation with brutal clarity. The hegemony has declared us a plague species. They've quarantined us. They've cut off our trade. They've positioned military assets on every border of our territory, and their internal communications, which we've been intercepting for the past 4 years, because apparently the negligible species has better signals intelligence than they expected, indicate that they are developing a plan for our permanent elimination. She paused. They want to sterilize our worlds. All of them. Every colony. Every outpost. Earth itself. A coordinated strike using relativistic kinetic impactors that would render every human-inhabited planet uninhabitable. Silence. The estimated timeline for this operation is 3 to 5 years. The hegemony is assembling the fleet now. More silence. We have 3 to 5 years to develop a deterrent so absolute, so terrifying, so fundamentally unacceptable, that the hegemony will not, cannot, follow through with their plan. Tanaka, I believe we have that deterrent. She activated a holographic display showing the molecular structure of the aerosolized Ichor compound. This is what we're going to build our future on. Not conquest. Deterrence. We're going to show the hegemony that if they try to kill us, the cost will be extinction, not ours, but theirs. The program was codenamed Project Lazarus. Over the next 2 years, humanity's best scientists, engineers, and military strategists worked to develop delivery systems for the aerosolized Ichor, missiles, drones, atmospheric dispersal pods, covert deployment packages that could be smuggled onto space stations, into trade hubs, onto the homeworlds of hegemony species themselves. The key innovation came from Commander David Okafor, a tactical officer with a background in submarine warfare, who approached the problem with a philosophy that would have been immediately recognized by any Cold War strategist for Earth's 20th century. We don't need to deploy it, he said. We just need them to know we can. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Integrated human operatives, individuals whose Ichor-enhanced biology allowed them to survive in environments that would kill any unmodified organism, would infiltrate hegemony space. They would plant aerosolized Ichor devices on key strategic targets, military installations, communication hubs, population centers. Not activated, not armed, detectable if anyone knew what to look for. And then humanity would make sure the hegemony knew what to look for. The operation launched in the 9th year of quarantine. 47 operatives. 47 humans with black-veined skin and dark eyes, and bodies that breathed radiation like air, slipping past hegemony borders in ships so small they registered as debris. They planted devices on 6 hegemony military starbases, 4 communication relay networks, 2 homeworlds, including the Dranathi capital, the heart of the hegemony's military command. And then on a carefully chosen date, the anniversary of the hegemony's quarantine declaration, Elena Vasquez broadcast a message on every frequency the hegemony monitored. Her face appeared on screens across 1,000 star systems. Black eyes, dark veins, a calm, steady voice that carried the weight of a species that had been sentenced to death and had decided, with characteristic human stubbornness, to refuse. This is Corporal Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Colonial Defense Force. I am addressing the galactic hegemony. You know what flows through my veins. You've spent 11 years trying to pretend it isn't real, trying to wall us in, trying to plan our extinction in secret, while you tell your citizens that the human problem is contained. It is not contained. Right now, 47 integrated human operatives are stationed within your borders. They are carrying devices loaded with a refined, aerosolized form of the substance you call Omega Null. These devices are positioned on your military installations, your communication networks, and 2 of your homeworlds. These devices are not armed. We have not come to threaten you. We have come to show you something. You spent 3 billion years believing that the Ichor was the end of all things, that nothing could survive it, that it was the universe's final word, a death sentence with no appeal. We are the appeal. We are not your enemies. We did not choose to drink the Ichor. We were forced to, by desperation, by starvation, by the indifference of a galaxy that looked at us and saw nothing worth saving. And when we survived, you tried to kill us for it. You tried to quarantine us, starve us, erase us. Because our existence breaks your models. Because we make the universe less predictable. Because you are afraid of what we represent. We understand your fear. We do not accept your solution. Here is ours. The quarantine ends. Trade relations resume. Humanity is recognized as a sovereign galactic power with full rights and full representation. In exchange, we will share the integration protocol, the means by which the Ichor can be processed into a survivable, beneficial form with any species that wants it. We will end the threat of Omega Null for everyone, not just for us, for the entire galaxy. And we can show you what happens when the only species immune to the galaxy's greatest weapon decides it has nothing left to lose. You have 30 standard days. Vasquez out. The transmission ended. The hegemony's response was not immediate, but the panic was. Across hegemony space, military commanders scrambled to verify Elena's claims. They found the devices, every single one, exactly where she said they'd be. They analyzed the contents. They confirmed that the aerosolized Ichor was genuine, active, and configured for atmospheric dispersal. They ran the models. If the devices were activated, the affected zones would become permanently uninhabitable for any non-human biology. The Ichor would spread through atmospheric and hydrological cycles, saturating the biosphere, killing every non-integrated organism within weeks. 2 hegemony homeworlds, including the Dranathi capital, home to 9 billion sentient beings, would be sterilized. The Dranathi admiral who had recommended sterilizing Kepler 442b 11 years ago sat in his command chair and stared at the tactical display, showing a human device nestled in the ventilation system of his own flagship. He thought about what the Keeper of Sorrows had said years ago about what would happen if they tried to kill humanity and failed. He thought about it for a long time. The hegemony accepted humanity's terms on the 22nd day. But the story doesn't end with a treaty. Treaties are paper. Treaties are words. What happened next was something deeper. A fundamental shift in the galaxy's understanding of what humanity was, and what it was becoming. Because the Ichor wasn't just a weapon, and the integration wasn't just a defense. And it was only beginning. Humanity had turned the galaxy's greatest poison into its most powerful bargaining chip. But deterrence is a strategy for survival, not for dominance. And deep in the toxic reaches of the galaxy's most hostile sectors, the places where no other species could breathe, could walk, could exist, humanity was discovering something that would transform us from survivors into rulers. The galaxy has places where the radiation is so intense it melts stone, where the atmosphere is composed of compounds that dissolve organic tissue on contact, where the Ichor pools in vast ancient oceans that have been waiting for 3 billion years for something to come and claim them. The treaty changed everything, and nothing. On the surface, the galaxy stabilized. Humanity was recognized. Trade routes opened. The integration protocol was shared, cautiously, in limited forms, with species that requested it. A few, the bravest and most desperate, attempted partial integration under human supervision. Some succeeded. Most required extensive modification of the protocol to account for their radically different biologies. None achieved anything close to full human-level integration. The Ichor, it seemed, had a preference. Underneath the surface, the real transformation was happening in places the hegemony couldn't see. Humanity spread, not into the comfortable habitable systems that every other species coveted, the temperate worlds with breathable atmospheres and gentle stars. We went somewhere else. We went into the death zones. The galaxy is a violet place. For every paradise world orbiting a stable star, there are 1,000 hellscapes. Planets bathed in lethal radiation, moons with atmospheres of molecular acid, asteroid fields saturated with Ichor deposits that had been festering since before the first star formed. These places were marked on every galactic chart with the universal symbol for do not enter. They were voids, wastelands, the places where the universe itself seemed hostile to the existence of life. For integrated humans, they were home. The first deep Ichor colony was established on a world the hegemony had designated as IG-7741, a rocky planet orbiting a magnetar whose radiation output was so intense that unshielded ships couldn't approach within 3 AU. The planet's surface was scoured by constant magnetic storms. Its thin atmosphere was a cocktail of radioactive isotopes and aerosolized dark matter particles. The Ichor seeped from its crust like groundwater, pooling in vast black lakes that covered nearly a third of the surface. By hegemony standards, IG-7741 was the most hostile environment in the charted galaxy. Elena Vasquez stepped onto its surface without a suit, took a deep breath of the toxic atmosphere, and smiled. "It smells like rain," she said. The colony, named New Prometheus, grew quickly. Integrated humans found that the deep Ichor environments did more than sustain them. The constant exposure to high concentrations of the substance accelerated the integration process, pushing human biology into configurations that even Elena hadn't anticipated. The second generation, children born to fully integrated parents, children who had never known a body without the Ichor, were different. They didn't just tolerate the Ichor. Their biology had incorporated the dark matter proteins so thoroughly that they required regular exposure to maintain optimal function. In the toxic wastelands that would have killed any other species in seconds, they thrived. They grew faster. They thought faster. Their neural pathways built from birth on quantum-enhanced architecture, processed information at speeds that made baseline human cognition look glacial. They could see across the electromagnetic spectrum. They could feel gravitational fluctuations. Some of the oldest children, the ones born in the highest concentration zones, began displaying abilities that the colony scientists struggled to categorize. Telekinetic manipulation of dark matter particles. Direct neural communication across distances that should have required technological augmentation. Conscious control of their own cellular processes, allowing them to heal wounds in minutes, adapt their metabolism to new environments in hours, and, in one documented case, survive the vacuum of space for over 40 minutes without any protection at all. They were not entirely human anymore, not in the traditional sense, but they were not alien either. They were something new, something the universe had never produced before, a hybrid, biological and quasi-physical, organic and quantum mechanical, mortal, and something that was becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish from immortal. The hegemony watched, and for the first time in its long history, the hegemony felt something it had never felt before. Irrelevance. Because here was the truth that the elder species were beginning to understand. The galaxy's most valuable real estate wasn't the paradise worlds, it wasn't the temperate zones with breathable air and gentle gravity. Those places were pleasant, yes, comfortable, but they were also ordinary. The extraordinary resources, the exotic matter deposits, the dark energy wells, the quantum state minerals that could revolutionize technology and physics, and the fundamental understanding of the universe itself, those were all in the death zones. The places where the Ichor pooled. The places where radiation levels made conventional biology impossible. The places that the hegemony had sealed off not because they wanted to protect anyone, but because they couldn't access them. Humanity could. Only humanity could. Within 50 years of the treaty, human deep Ichor colonies controlled access to resources that the rest of the galaxy could barely comprehend. Exotic matter that could bend space-time, dark energy substrates that could power a civilization for millennia. Quantum state minerals that made faster-than-light travel look like a toy. The hegemony's economy, built on conventional resources, conventional technology, conventional physics, began to falter. Not because humans were hoarding resources. They weren't. They traded freely, fairly, at prices that were reasonable by any standard. But the mere fact that they were the only ones who could access these resources gave them leverage that no other species had ever possessed. It wasn't military dominance, it wasn't political manipulation, it was something simpler and more absolute. Necessity. The galaxy needed what humanity had, and only humanity could get it. The philosophical implications were staggering, and they hit humanity hardest of all. On Earth, beautiful, fragile, beloved Earth, where the first humans had looked up at the stars and dreamed, a cultural revolution was underway. The old questions that had haunted humanity since we first developed consciousness. Who are we? Why are we here? What is our purpose? Suddenly had an answer that was both terrifying and exhilarating. We were the species that death could not kill. We were the ones who ate the poison and called it food, who breathed the void and called it air, who walked into the darkness that had swallowed civilizations and built our homes there. We were not the galaxy's weakest species. We had never been the galaxy's weakest species. We had been something else entirely, something so improbable, so statistically impossible, so cosmically absurd that the universe's own models couldn't account for us. We were the error in the equation, the biological typo that turned a death sentence into an evolution. And we were just getting started. Elena Vasquez, now over 80 years old, though her integrated body showed no signs of aging beyond the dark eyes and veined skin that had become symbols of human resilience across the galaxy, stood on the surface of New Prometheus and looked up at the sky. The magnetard blazed overhead, pouring out radiation that would have sterilized a continent. The air was thick with dark matter particles that shimmered like black snow. The Ichor lakes stretched to the horizon, their surfaces pulsing with the same slow, ancient rhythm that Elena had first felt in the emergency shelter of the Vagrant Hope, a lifetime ago, when she was a starving corporal with nothing left to lose. She could feel the Ichor, all of it. Not just the lakes on this world, but the deposits scattered across the galaxy, the void zones, the deep wells, the ancient reservoirs. She could feel them the way a heart feels its own beating, distant, constant, connected. The Ichor had tried to kill her. It had tried to kill all of them. And in failing, it had become part of them, part of their biology, their identity, their destiny. She thought about the Keeper of Sorrows, about the Vel-Karath, who had been the galaxy's greatest biological engineers, and who had been destroyed by the Ichor 3 billion years ago. She thought about the Keeper's words, "You should not be possible." Elena smiled, a smile that was human and warm and stubborn and defiant. Despite the black eyes and the dark veins and the body that was now more than human, but would never be less. No, she said to the toxic wind. We shouldn't be. But we are. And we're not going anywhere. Behind her, the colony of New Prometheus hummed with life. Human life. Impossible life. Children with quantum minds played in pools of liquid death, laughing. Engineers built structures from materials that would have dissolved the flesh of any other species. Scientists probed the secrets of the Ichor itself, pushing deeper into the mystery of its origin. Because humanity had survived the what, and now it wanted to understand the why. And across the galaxy, in the halls of the hegemony, in the councils of elder species, in the quiet contemplations of beings who had ruled the stars for millions of years, a new understanding was settling, like dust after a storm. The age of the hegemony was ending. Not with war. Not with conquest. Not with the dramatic, violent collapse that had ended every galactic power before it. It was ending because the galaxy had found its apex predator. Not the strongest. Not the most intelligent. Not the most technologically advanced. The most stubborn. The most adaptable. The most fundamentally, beautifully, impossibly alive. Humanity didn't conquer the galaxy. We didn't need to. We simply walked into the places where nothing else could survive, and we lived there. We breathed the unbreathable. We ate the inedible. We made our home in the house of death, and we redecorated. The forbidden Ichor, the breath of the Unmaker, the silence between stars, compound omega null, the substance that had ended 900 trillion lives across 3 billion years of galactic history, became the foundation of a human civilization that would endure long after every other empire had turned to dust. Not because we were special, not because we were chosen, because one starving woman in a broken ship in the darkest place in the universe looked at death and said, "Let me try something." And death blinked first. And that, my friends, is the story of how humanity drank the galaxy's forbidden poison and became unkillable, from a desperate act of survival by one woman in a dying ship, to the rise of an empire built on the ashes of a substance that had destroyed every other civilization it touched. This is what it means to be human. We don't accept death sentences. We don't follow the rules that say we're supposed to fail. We take the worst the universe can throw at us, and we find a way, not just to survive, but to thrive. If this story gave you chills, if it made you proud to be human, if it made you think about what we're capable of when our backs are against the wall, then I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that stories like this matter, and it helps HFY Endurance Tale reach more people who love epic sci-fi. Subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the bell notification so you never miss a story. We post regularly, and every single story is designed to remind you why humanity is the most terrifying, inspiring, and unstoppable species the galaxy has ever seen. Drop a comment below. Tell me what your favorite moment was. Was it Elena drinking the Ichor, the confrontation with the hegemony, the children playing in pools of liquid death on New Prometheus? I read every single comment, and your feedback shapes what stories we tell next. And share this video. Send it to a friend. Post it in your group chats. Tag someone who needs to hear a story about humanity refusing to die. This has been HFY Endurance Tale. Until next time, stay stubborn, stay alive, and never ever let the universe tell you what you can't survive.